Thanks again to Limelight Networks for sponsoring all of Streaming Media East Connect. I'd also like to thank the Platinum sponsors for this particular session who have stepped up to help us make this session possible. Digital Element is one of our sponsors, and if you take a moment there, you can see the number of clients that are among Digital Element's customers and a little bit about what they do and how they can help you with your streaming video needs. Our other sponsor for today's session is Red 5 Pro, and we've got another short video to play for you from Red 5 Pro.
Hi, I'm Chris Allen, President and CEO of Red 5 Pro. I'm going to give you a quick demo of what we're doing with live real-time video streaming. One of the biggest problems in our industry today is the latency in live video streams. Typical IP-based solutions add anywhere from 10 to 45 seconds of latency into the live stream, and those that can do real-time video streaming tend to not scale. We're reducing the latency down to under 500 milliseconds and making it able to scale up to millions of concurrent viewers. We can do this by using WebRTC and a unique cloud-based architecture. Each node in our cluster is another virtual instance on a cloud platform. In this case, we have origin nodes, which take the incoming streams, and then they're distributed out to edges, which then the subscribers of those video streams are able to consume. To create more capacity than what a single origin node could handle, we fan out to relay nodes, which allow us to scale into the millions of concurrent viewers using cloud instances. The brains of the operations is a node called the Stream Manager. It takes care of routing broadcasters to origins and subscribers to the edges. The Stream Manager also automatically scales up and down the instances as needed. Finally, through our cross-cloud delivery system, you're able to leverage multiple cloud platforms to scale out globally. Now let me show you a demo of the round-trip latency coming from my house here in Cape Cod to a DigitalOcean installation in New York. So I've got a stream running here coming from this camera on my desktop, and it's streaming out to the same exact computer here on my Mac. And you can see that the latency coming back and forth is extremely low. If you're interested in learning more, hit us up at red5pro.com.
And all right, now I'm unmuted. Rob, I pray we've gotten all the technical difficulties out of the way for this session, and I'm going to pass it over to the professional Robert Reinhardt to talk about optimizing your live streaming workflow. If you want to ask any questions, type them in the Q&A panel in Zoom, and Rob will get them as they come in or at the end of his session. Take it away, Rob.
Thanks, Eric. Just confirm you got audio from me. Can you hear me? Okay, excellent. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Get this good one here. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize Zoom. Go to my slide deck. Well, again, I'll reiterate what Eric mentioned earlier. Thank you so much for joining live. I know everyone's got obligations, and being here live allows us to interact together. Of course, we're recording all these sessions so you can watch them later again too. I've done this session in past streaming media conferences. We've retitled it to How to Optimize Your Live Streaming Workflow. And hopefully in the time that I have today, you'll walk away with some information that you didn't have before. Thank you to our sponsors again, Red 5, Limelight, and the others that Steve had on the slide. I'm going to go ahead and just jump forward to a quick overview of the roles that I often play on projects. I'm a self-titled video solutions architect. Back in the days when I worked at big agencies, one of the hats I wore was a solutions architect, and I've now just added the word video in front of that so that it's clear that the architectures I build are very specific to video. I manage teams. I've got a team of subcontractors that works on a wide range of projects, all involving video, of course. I've been a writer of several books and continue to write for Streaming Media Magazine. Lots of my articles are online for you to look at. And I also teach. I did workshops last week for the conference with FFmpeg. I do on-site training when there aren't COVID travel restrictions in play. And more and more of my training is being done remotely with or without COVID restrictions. And just some quick contact information to share with you as well, just so that you can follow up with me afterwards. Feel free to send me emails and reach out to me on social media, Twitter, Rob_Reinhardt, if you have any questions. So, one of the, I'm going to start with this diagram with live streaming. Earlier we saw Chris Allen showing Red 5, and you could substitute Red 5 in any media server in with these diagrams that I'm showing. I use Wowza a lot in my workflows. I've worked with Red 5 as well, and there's lots of server offerings out there that will fit the requirements that you have on a technical level and a business level. Generally speaking, I think most people here are aware of the different protocols. We can ingest with RTMP, RTSP, SRT, WebRTC, and typically you need that to be consumed by an origin that's going to, among other things, translate that video into multiple bit rates, distribute it to edges, and on whatever cloud platform that you're using. This is just a quick illustration of, all the facets that can go into that. Typically, though, my live streaming deployment, especially when I do live webcasts, I do a lot of live streaming where I show up with my gear, and especially now with COVID restrictions, I was just approached by a school to live stream their graduation ceremonies at the end of this month. And so they're going to have social distancing and a big field. They're going to have a stage. I'm going to show up with cameras, video switchers, and probably wearing a mask and gloves on top of it. But in those kind of architectures, it's greatly simplified. I'm going to most likely push over RTMP into a streaming media, into a media server. That is going to be distributed by a cheaper cloud distribution service. In this case, I have CloudFront in my diagram, and the consumer, the subscriber in this case, is going to be ingesting an HLS stream. Now, getting down to gear, I'm a big fan of the Asia Hilo. Videon has some really great equipment coming onto that has been on the market for a couple of years now. And again, you probably already have some H.264 encoders, maybe an HEVC encoder in your arsenal already. Any of that gear can apply. And again, you're pushing those RTMP streams into an ingest, and you're pushing out. And you can use any off-the-shelf player like JW Player, Bitmovin, VideoJS, Mux, any video player that has an HLS renderer in it can go ahead and play that stream. And here's a quick breakout of like all that gear that comes into play. I forgot to mention too that in years past I did run this as a hands-on workshop where I'd bring gear in, demonstrate how some of this gear would work over a 3-hour workshop period. So I've distilled that workshop into this session as best as I can, hitting the key points that I think are vital to people running live events. And so in this instance, you can see, and I'm just going to use the zoom on my keyboard here to move around. Nope, I just went past my slides, sorry. Let me go back, there we go. So as you can see here, I've got the Roland V60 HD switcher. I've got the cameras coming into it as SDI or HDMI inputs. You've got an HDMI monitor in view. And let me zoom out again here so I can just get the whole slide. And then you've got all your other inputs. You've got, the PowerPoint deck. I use Wirecast to generate lower thirds onto the presentation. So if I want to have a name plate underneath my headshots for who's at the podium, that school graduation I was just talking about, there's only going to be one speaker, probably the head of school. So I'm going to have a lower third with the school graphics and branding with that head of school's name. And then, of course, you need all your audio tied in, projectors, projection screens, and that's all going to vary based on the venue size. Even with COVID restrictions, people are putting together virtual, physical venues that they intend to broadcast out. So, and I'm a big fan of redundancy. I always bring multiple cameras, even if the client only wants one or two angles covered. In terms of laptops, always have extra laptops on hand, and the same with recording. I always record 2 ProRes masters, and I have 2 encoders pushing at the same time. And I've part of what I've done on the media server installations that I use, I've programmed modules to do an auto failover. So if a primary goes down, the backup switches in right away, and it's usually only off by a frame or 2. Most viewers wouldn't even know that there was a glitch that happened. Ideally, you have those on independent networks as well, so that my primary stream, like the school, is going to have a very fast fiber backbone that I'm going to be plugging into their LAN, and hopefully I would have a secondary connection as well on an independent network. So if they had a cable provider that was on a secondary network or something through a telco, that I could use my second encoder. If they wouldn't, then I would even put into the proposal me bringing 3G, 4G bonded solutions as a backup, especially in an outdoor scenario. That's perfect. You're outside, you're not going to have any as many obstructions to an outdoor signal as you would if you were indoors. And if you are indoors, you want to try and strategically place your antennas somewhere where they're getting a stronger reception. These days, this is becoming more common, just like we're doing here. We don't have a physical location. We're all attending this virtually. Last week, we were using a combination of Wirecast and Zoom. Had some technical issues with Wirecast, mainly because it was running on the same box that I was presenting on. Ideally, the presenter is another feed that you bring into your software switching, and this you could use a hardware switcher as well. Anything, one of the things that I think webcasters could be doing right now, if they haven't already, jumped onto this bandwagon, is help people run their Zoom broadcasts. And what I mean by that is capturing Zoom and redeploying it over other traditional networks that they might be used to, because oftentimes you don't need the participation of a Zoom webinar like we have here. You might even have different, if you were running a virtual event where you had paid levels of access, maybe there was a premium ticket paid to come into a Zoom webinar, but you had a cheaper offering just to watch the live stream without any interaction, or a VOD afterwards. And so this is a very common workflow now, where you're capturing a more professional input. I'm actually using a lot of these components right now. I'm using a Sony Z150 or a Z150 for my American friends. I forgot to mention, I'm broadcasting live from Salt Spring Island here in British Columbia, Canada. So I'm using this Z150 right now. That's the camera I'm on right here. I'm just using a webcam mic. I'm not using the Sony Lav that you see pictured here. And I'm pushing out over Zoom as those connected devices. So Zoom is directly accessing the Blackmagic Design Ultra Studio Mini recorder there that's in this picture, and pushing out to this Zoom webinar. So now I'm going to break out into some slides. We will jump into QA, and we'll do I have 45 minutes for this session, Eric? Do I go to 2 o'clock?
Nope, you've got an hour. So, and even if you can run a little over as well. And you're we're already receiving a bunch of questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
So we can save those to the end, or you can take a look at some of them now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Before I break into the slide deck, there might be some pertinent questions here. So I'm going to just exit out of my slide deck here and go to Q&A. First question, can you confirm that HEVC is contained? So that's a good point. It's funny that you mentioned that, because, oh man, what's the name of that? Lumix, is it Lumix? Our friend Yuri, who runs Nimble Streamer, has a product that is now doing experimental HEVC over RTMP. But that's a really good question from Mohit there, is that, typically you are not putting HEVC in an RTMP container. That's the good news with SRT workflows. You can use SRT for HEVC. The RTMP spec is somewhat frozen now, in the sense that only the codec, Adobe's not moving that specification forward. So so yeah, that's the quick answer to that question. HEVC is best going to be done over SRT. Depending on your server workflow, in the case of Wowza, I can use a UDP transmission for HEVC if the encoder supports it. Those Videon, Shimano, and the higher end. Shimano's been replaced with another model now that I haven't tested yet. But a lot of vendors now are pushing, can't have the ability to push over UDP, so I could target my stream. I could open a UDP port on my streaming server, consume HEVC that way. And it does come in handy. Oftentimes, if I have that primary backup scenario, and I try to run that every time, like you don't get a repeat on live, so have redundant connections. I'll do an H.264 push on the primary connection with an H.264 encoder, and then with a secondary encoder, I'm going to use HEVC over another protocol as the backup, because HEVC, especially if it's 3G, 4G, you're going to be able to use lower bit rates over HEVC. So if you're in a constrained bandwidth environment, HEVC is certainly a nice option to have if you have it. If you're using Wirecast Pro, then why do you need Wowza or any media streaming server? To answer that question, I would say not necessarily would you need Wirecast, depending on how you want to remux it, right? In my case, I like to have one high, and I didn't demonstrate, maybe I did back on that other slide where I showed the whole server architecture, but typically what I'm doing with Wirecast is pushing out one high quality bitrate stream if it's 720 or 1080, and then I have the streaming server do the transcoding, so I don't need available bandwidth to do all the bit rates, right? So also that's more CPU required out of Wirecast. So if you can pull off multiple bit rates and you have a standard installation where you've got that pipe to go over, you may not need the server transcodes. But I'm a big fan of offloading all transrating and transcoding to the media server or an ingest media service, Elemental, any of the cloud services that are fine-tuned to ingest can do that. I believe Teradek can do, Teradek has a transcoding cloud as well. So yeah, the second question is, we have quite a few here. Switcher, I might not get to all these right now, but do I need a switcher if I'm using Wirecast Pro? No, you wouldn't need a switcher necessarily. I am a big fan though of hardware switchers because they're less likely to fail. Even before this Zoom webinar, my Mac, this is a fairly new MacBook Pro, just decided to randomly reboot on its own. I wasn't doing anything except for editing text. I've seen that happen with Windows laptops too. So I'm not, software is always going to be software. And I'm not saying hardware can't have issues, but I'm a big fan of dedicated appliances. So I will certainly use Wirecast if it's all I have access to, but if I can use hardware to run a show, I will always use hardware to do that. It's a personal preference, and so that might be, again, budget dependent. Is it possible to use Wirestream to live stream with multiple iPhones? I haven't personally done that, but Wirecast Go is an option. You can install Wirecast Go on your iPhones and then consume Wirecast Go clients within Wirecast. vMix and other providers have similar solutions, but I haven't played with vMix in that regard. But I have done a little experimentation with Wirecast Go. So that would be the easiest way to switch between iPhones. There's all sorts of solutions out there that involve hardware. I'm trying to think of, oh gosh, the name's evading me. One of my government clients uses it, but I think Sling makes it. But maybe Steve knows and he can come back. But there's a nice little piece of hardware where you can put all these wireless adapters on several things and run whole productions from iPhones and iPads. It's pretty amazing. Would I recommend HEVC and MPEG-2 TS over SRT? That's a good question. To date, I haven't actually used HEVC over SRT except in quick testing with it. I usually use an MPEG-2 transport stream over UDP. And I'm a big fan of UDP because it's, not that, I think SRT uses TCP and UDP as well. But to date, because SRT wasn't available in earlier implementations of HEVC, I've sort of stuck with the UDP broadcasting of HEVC. So I would say whatever fits for what you need to, with your specific solution. I'm going to pause there and we'll get to some of these other questions after I get through some more of my slide deck. But these are all really great questions. So I'm going to go ahead and close this pod and go back to my slide deck. One of the things that, you know, when it comes to live streaming that you need to figure out very early in with, you know, optimizing your workflow, of course, is going to just be what are your roles in that workflow. My role as a technical director or even just a video solutions architect for live streams will vary from one project to the next and vary with each client that I have as well. So those roles are going to, you know, so let's just quickly review what every live stream needs. Doesn't matter what you're doing, you're going to need a capture source, meaning you're going to need to, you know, whether it's a laptop, whether it's, you know, presenting PowerPoint, whether it's a camera showing the talent, and you're going to need an encoder to get that out, right? Some capture sources can do the encoding as well, but it is a separate role. So you're going to need to take those raw bits coming out, whether it's HDMI or SDI coming out of your camera, and finesse that through an encoder and various codecs that you're going to need to support. You're going to need a publish endpoint to push those bits to once they're encoded, and you're going to need a player to put that, you know, so that people can watch that stream. And you're most likely going to need an archive or recording of it. I won't say every live stream needs an archive or recording, but I can't think of a situation where I've had a client say, oh no, just throw this away. I don't need it after the live stream. You're going to record everything, right? And of course, reliable internet connections. And notice that's plural. You don't want just one connection. Again, there's no do-overs with live. And it's one of those things where, you know, often it can be expensive at different venues to get backup internet connections, but make sure you've covered your bases there. Again, just more details on those things that I already enumerated. Capture source could be anything from a screen sharing driver to a locally attached camera, remotely connected cameras, computer display output, or like we mentioned before, that Roland switcher. Your encoder could be built into your software like Wirecast, OBS, FFmpeg, vMix, or it could be a hardware-based encoder. I'm a big fan of H.264 hardware encoders, and let me just quickly edit that slide too. That should say H.265 encoder. That was sort of a repeat. There we go. I like fixing slides on the fly. Why not? Because I'm going to have these available afterwards. All right. A publish endpoint could be a CDN, you know, Akamai, Limelight, whoever it is that's, you know, going to take in your stream and distribute it. It could actually be a combination of CDNs for the edges. A social media outlet could be Facebook, could be Twitter, it could be YouTube, of course, or a streaming server, one that you're running on your own. Red 5 server on the cloud, it could be whatever you've got that you're running as your own dedicated stream media server. Of course, lots of options when it comes to players, right? There's open source, there's fee-based players that you can put on a web page. And if you need to put it into your own native app, well, then you're looking at native SDKs that can embed, you know, the video player logic and handling of HLS or dash streams, whatever it is that you're muxing out to in that native app. Not every live stream is going to need a paywall or low latency playback or secure playback with encryption. DRM I list separately because encryption isn't necessarily the same thing as DRM. It is a type of DRM. And just limited access. How are you going to make sure people can't copy and paste your playback URLs from a player and distribute them to other people outside of your paywall? Of course, you get all of this information and more when you do a proper discovery. Eric, I don't know if my discovery column went out yet. I always forget when it goes live, but I recently wrote a column about conducting discovery. I don't remember the exact title, but on Stream Media Magazine and online, you'll likely find it, if not now, then soon.
It's online now, Rob. It is online on Streaming Media now. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So your discovery process should, at minimum, do what's on this slide. You want to identify who the stakeholders and product owners are. If you don't know the difference, I'll quickly just say a stakeholder is usually someone at a C-level. A product owner is more of a manager responsible for taking the initiatives of the stakeholders forward and manage that whatever you're doing on a day-to-day basis, right? C-level people don't usually get involved as product owners. I've seen it happen. It's not always a pretty picture when it does happen, but you know, those are the two primary people that should, or two primary sets of people that should be involved in discovery. You want to identify the vendors that are going to be responsible. Oftentimes, I started to go down this rabbit hole before, but I might just come to an event, especially if it's a really big event. I do contract work with the British Columbia government, and oftentimes I'll just be brought in to do the encoding part of it. They'll have a bigger vendor like ProShow who does, you know, huge events where there's big stages, you know, projectors that are super expensive and have, you know, custom lenses, all this, you know, fancy lighting. And I don't do those kind of productions, you know, in terms of setting them up, but I'll certainly come in and do my subject matter expertise with the encoding part of it. So, you know, I'll show up, I'll have my own little area on a table, and I'll be the one who's doing the encoding, and I'll need to, you know, during discovery, make sure that that other vendor who's responsible for providing me the raw signal knows what they have to give me. You know, hopefully it's an SDI connection with a progressive output. Who's going to be responsible for all that content that's going to go into the live stream, the PowerPoint presentations, the graphics, video clips? You know, earlier in this, you saw Steve had to get videos from Limelight, from Red 5 Pro, and put them into this presentation. So, you know, Steve didn't just know he had to do that. That came about from a meeting. And how is that budget going to be framed? Is there, what are the fixed costs? What are the variable costs? You know, I probably don't have to tell you, when you're hiring really large entities to run events, they're going to bill you for everything that you do with that live event, right? You need an extra cable, they're going to bill you for that extra cable, whatever the rental is. So make sure you know what those variable costs are going into it, especially if you're just one vendor mixed in with a bunch of other vendors. Especially there might be vendor to vendor billing. Hopefully, you know, payment is centralized, but it can get complicated. And most recently, and I'm sharing this with you so that, you know, if you want to copy this survey, this is fairly new. I put it together for around all the, you know, frustrations of people dealing with COVID and COVID restrictions and people who were trying to put together events. So I put together this survey. It just redirects to a SurveyMonkey survey that I put together over the last few months. I keep growing it and adding new questions, but this is the kind of information you want to gather. I don't have time to go in. I think I have now 34 or 35 questions in that survey. There's conditional logic, it jumps around, but you know, it gets me a lot of information that any stakeholder or product owner could hopefully you know, provide those details before we get too far into that pipe or down into that process. I'm going to go into the working with a budget. Again, these slides are going to be available after the show, and you know, any edits that I make will be in the PDF that I provide to Eric to put online. Working with a budget. This was part of the session description, so I just want to go in there. I have recently in my survey tried to get you know, tried to coax people. It's amazing, by the way, what if you present someone with a survey, that they'll answer more questions online when it's just them, even though they know you're going to get the information, then they might feel comfortable on the phone or in an email giving you. So in my survey, I often, you know, I've just added to my survey a range of budgets that clients can choose from if that's where they anticipate their budget to fall in. And of course, I put a not sure option in there. So if they don't want to disclose it, or they haven't really you know, done the math yet on their end, that they you know, can just say not sure. But it's best if you know, obviously you want to be in the right ballpark. You probably can imagine that I have people contacting me that think they can pull off I hire another vendor to do a webcast for under $1,000 US, and that's a you know, I won't say you can't do it for under that price, but you know, that's, you know, everyone's going to have their baseline costs for putting out, you know, the services that they offer. I have a minimum engagement fee that I present to clients. So just, you know, when you're putting together your live streaming workflows and putting together events, again, this is very event specific or service specific. Try and just, you know, make sure that you quickly get to a point where the client knows how much it's going to cost them, so that if they have to retool their expectations, they're going to do that. That's the other reason I like having the survey available, is that it lets stakeholders and product owners understand the sheer scope of live streaming. I can't tell you how many people really are only starting to get into live streaming now, right? They've run organizations with physical events. They're used to physical locations, and live streaming was always an afterthought. Well, they don't have that luxury now. Live streaming is critical to getting their messaging out, whether that's for a corporate event or a trade association, whatever it is. Stakeholders now know that live streaming has to be part of that mix. How do you present that bid? Again, this is more on the business side. I like to break things down so that people can see, I don't just give them one big fixed number, like it's going to cost you this. Break down your labor costs, break down your equipment costs, your deployment costs. Don't gloss over. Make sure you have your markups in place. So if you're the one providing the hosting and streaming to the end user, you got to cover your bases, right? So oftentimes though, and this is just part of my business model, if a client is tech savvy and they have their own AWS account, then I'll set up everything on their AWS account, so I don't have to absorb any risk there. There is still a lot of pricing though that we're live streaming vendors and webcasters will benefit from max capacities that aren't ever reached, right? Like just as a quick example, some people, if an organization says, well, we want this stream guaranteed to go out to 10,000 users, right? And so you got to build architecture around that, and you've got to make sure that you can reach 10,000 users. You're going to base your pricing potentially on fixed costs for 10,000 users, and they're going to pay for 10,000 users whether or not the audience reach that size, right? Even if there's only a few thousand that show up, most people want to at least double it, just because they're not sure how their messaging is going to get out. That school that I was talking about before said that they estimated 100 to 200 people would be watching, the live stream. So I would double that number and then make sure I had capacity for that. And again, most, your clients aren't likely going to accept variable pricing. Like, well, this could be anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 just for bandwidth, right? Like, so, you want to give people reasonable expectations for what those deployment costs are going to be. Also, just configuring the player ends and whatever else that you have to do on the front end, if they have business requirements around access to the stream, those can be mini budgets in and of themselves, right? Separate from any kind of live streaming costs. Your equipment costs, of course, again, for sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of these categories, but there's a lot of equipment that you need for a high quality live stream to be pulled off. And again, I'll just emphasize redundancy. You don't want to just bring one camera to an event. You want to have more than one camera. Anything that could fail, you want to have a backup so that if anything goes down, you're back up and running in a short amount of time as possible. Just some tips. What I like to do, I always like to use shared docs and spreadsheets. I really hate it when clients attach documents. If they do, I quickly put them on a private link on Google Drive so that we could share it if it needs to be edited, adjusted. Sharing documents with email, of course, is a no. It just doesn't work very well. And I like to organize my bids with each option on a separate sheet within a greater worksheet. So, I might have labor costs on one, gear rental on another, deployment cost, all those categories I presented before. And now we're going to go into on-location setups, just so again, these are mainly checklists. Always, visit those locations in advance. Even now with COVID restrictions, like I said before, people are putting together physical stages that are going to be virtualized, right? So you might actually have your speakers showing up on site. Restrictions are lessening, but big groups still aren't allowed to talk. I mean, they're not allowed to talk. They're not allowed to gather, right? So depending on your municipality or your state or province or country, you might not be able to have more than 50 people together in any location. So there's still going to be restraints on crowd control these days moving forward. They'll be lessening up, of course, but make sure you know exactly what you're in for with the location. Get a map from your client, like say, hey, I want to break down to the venue so that we can just, plot these points out. The day prior, I like to, set up and have everything ready. If it's a full day broadcast, set up the day before, test everything that you can, test. And of course, the day of that event, we're going to run through all those same checks an hour before, test all the deployment, playback use cases, make sure there's no issues with it. The encoding setup, we're going to, usually in advance of an event, you can notice there's a pattern here. All of these are in advance of the event, during the event, after the event, if it applies. So, a lot of stakeholders don't really know the difference between 720p and 1080p or, various bit rates at those resolutions. So prepare samples, get some sample footage from them, show them past broadcasts that you've done, show them what the quality is, because, again, pushing a 720 broadcast is going to be different than pushing a 1080 broadcast, just from the sheer, the bit rate you need to have available on site. The day prior, we're going to do all those same bandwidth checks, make sure the bit rates are working as advertised. And the day of, we're going to make sure that we've got those playbacks running, everything that you were doing before. I like to run live streams to publish endpoints at least 10 minutes ahead of time, so we're not just going live right when it needs to go live. There's a variety of tools that you can use server side with media servers to go from a VOD looping on the server to a live stream. I've built modules that do that so that when I want to switch to a live stream, it's just something I do on the server. It's not something I have to do on site with an actual push of a button. Video switcher setup. Obviously, you're going to need to know in advance how many video sources you're going to need. Discuss, part of that stakeholder product owner discovery process is figuring out how many people, where is the action going to be on stage? If there is a stage, who needs to see what? And that's going to obviously affect how many video sources you have going into either your software switcher or your hardware switcher. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these points just for sake of time. Day prior to that event broadcast, we're going to want to do very specific things, especially if I'm getting audio. Oftentimes audio is being managed by other personnel. A lot of times that's a unionized setup. If someone rents a space, they have to use the staff there that does what that staff does well. So microphones and speakers might be all in-house. So if I'm doing video and someone else is doing audio, I need to make sure that my signals are synced for the outbound. So testing audio sync, just a cheap clapper will do. You can buy cheap clappers from Amazon that, review recordings of your sync test. Making sure your inputs and outputs, all your inputs match for color saturation and brightness, whatever it is to make one scene look consistent to the next. That can be tricky depending on your video switcher setup. Ideally, you use the same camera. I have two Z150s from Sony. I have an FS5. They're pretty close to each other in color, but even cameras of the same maker and model are going to have slight variations. With live, you don't have the benefit of touching things up in post. It's got to look good right away, right? Because it's going live. Again, if they're always redo exposure tests the day of, even during an event. If I'm going to be outside for the school graduation, I may need to be prepared to adjust exposures on the fly, because natural light is not going to be consistent. The sun moves, clouds move. There's all sorts of things that could be affecting light. Of course, that's where if you have fill light filling a stage, it's going to be a lot more consistent, even with those. Deployment setup, let me go into that. In advance of event, you want to make sure, and this is more for how many destinations are you going to be going out to? Facebook, YouTube, your own, a custom website where you have a page set up. Confirm those compression settings used by an encoder. Just make sure that you've got these bases covered before you go into it. Social media destinations are tricky because usually, though, especially if they belong to another organization, they're going to need to give you access. Don't let them give you their username and password. That's a horrible, then it might break everything on their workflow. Most of the social media destinations that you go out to these days can have stream keys, something that's changeable, that doesn't reveal private authentication or private credentials. So, you know, that would be a bad scenario because it can break things. Make sure they just add you as like, you know, if you don't have a Facebook account for your company, then make one, you know, make a generic login that you can use so that when a live event comes up where you're going to be responsible for social media, you just say, yeah, just add this user account as a contributor or admin to your social media page, group, whatever it might be. Prior to the event broadcast, again, just test the reliability of internet. Make sure that access is there to those social media outlets. I've had organizations, you know, unknowingly, one person in the organization who didn't know anything about a live stream happening changed credentials and it broke our link, and we were scrambling the day of to make sure that that was fixed. And even the day of that can happen. So same exact steps there. Player setup. I'm almost to the end of my notes. Player setup, you want to make sure that you've got all your targets working. This is also something that stakeholders and product owners don't fully understand, is like, where do you want your stream to play, especially if it's on their own web page? What are the targets that they expect it to work on? You might need to coach them through that. Like, how old of an Android device do you want to support? How old of an iPhone device do you want to support? And so forth. Make sure that obviously we can't just push everything out with HEVC from a distribution point of view, because there's going to be players that can't work with that. So make sure that you've got those things lining up. Again, just make sure that everything is working with playback during the day prior and the day of. I always like to keep a reference player open when I'm streaming. That can eat into your bandwidth, right? If I'm watching the same live stream that I'm pushing out, you know, Chris was demonstrating that in his Red 5 latency test. It's a great idea to have that available so that you see what other people are seeing. Oftentimes I'll have my iPad set up, I'll have my iPhone set up, playing the stream so that I can, you know, see what's going on the live broadcast as if I were a participant. So if I start seeing issues there, then that's going to be a quick signal to me that, hey, something might be going on with something else in this workflow that I've got to fix. Obviously, that's going to use bandwidth, so you got to be careful. If you've got a limited pipe, you can only have so many reference players open. If you're going to be using your own, you know, data plan to do that, live streams are expensive. So again, make sure that's in your costs. If you're going to be, you know, running, you know, if you're going to use up a bunch of data watching live streams on devices as quality assurance, then include that in your budget. You don't want to absorb costs like that, because it's going to cut into your margins, right? And of course, testing and more testing. That's sort of my last slide. It is my last slide, I think, in the sense of just, you can never do too much testing. In fact, most people don't do enough testing, and it can be hard without having live audiences participating to see how well you're going to do under load. There's all sorts of solutions you can do for load testing these days for your HLS streams. I'm a big fan of JMeter with BlazeMeter free plugins. There's an HLS sampler plugin from BlazeMeter that you can tie into JMeter, and you can load test your stream media setup that way. Thank you for watching. I'm going to go ahead now and go back to QA. We've got quite a few questions lined up here. So how are we doing for time there, Eric, now that I've gotten through my slide deck there?
We've got 10 minutes to the top of the hour, but we can certainly go past the top of the hour by 5 minutes or so.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so one of the things, before I address the questions, I skipped over this because this is sort of new to this session. I haven't had to do it before because we haven't been using Zoom in past stream media conferences. I want to go back to this diagram and just go full screen with this here. So in this scenario where, you know, we're doing everything remotely, we're going through Zoom. I'm not using Wirecast in this demo, but just prior to this broadcast, I had Steve configure the Zoom account to push over a custom RTMP. So one of the things that Zoom will enable you to do on paid accounts, you can't do this with free accounts as far as I know. So you need a paid account. You may even need a paid certain level of account. I think I had an initial, whatever the first basic plan is, I think I had to go to the next level, not quite enterprise, which is very expensive on Zoom, but there is, to enable custom RTMP streaming. We are streaming this live to a media server. I'm just going to go over and show you real quickly here in Safari. Should have it open here. Let me sign into the media server. right? Got my password. So this was logged in early. Oh man, now I gotta get my credentials in here to log in. But if I go into this, I can see that right now we've configured this Zoom account to push an RTMP stream that we just called Stream Media East out to this media server, right? And there's transcoding happening for 360p and 160p. Now, so that's all pretty standard, right? We all know how to push RTMP. Well, just so you know, Zoom can push RTMP anywhere you want. And again, it's part of the plan. It's part of it. Most of the plans to do this. And what's neat about this is that if so I set up this URL here to, this is again just a test page, but you can see that I'm watching myself delayed probably by about 30 seconds or so in this DVR recording. And this is what's neat. You get the Zoom branding. You have to pay a lot. You have to have enterprise if you want to remove the Zoom brand from your pushes, right? So Zoom's going to automatically put their overlay on it. But what's interesting now is that I now have a feature that you don't have in Zoom. I'm using DVR on that Wowza streaming instance, so I can now rewind live into this very live broadcast. So if you're a Johnny come lately, as I like to call them, or Jimmy come lately, whatever expression you want to use for someone who comes to a session late, they now have the ability to rewind into this presentation. I can go back anywhere into my presentation and watch. I think I set a window of an hour. So we've been broadcasting for about 45 minutes, and I can go back and see that. So, and again, that's just from, so that's a feature that Zoom makes available. I could also be recording that stream. I think it is recording on that streaming engine box too. So just wanted to showcase that you can build on top of even a product like Zoom to do more than what Zoom can do for you. You don't get very much control of that layout, but it's a pretty neat feature. I'm going to go ahead now and break over to the QA pods. I'm going to stop sharing unless I need to go live with that. So the last question that, so we now have 16 open questions. The last question where I left off was how NDI integrates with live streaming. I'm just going to be honest, I don't use NDI in my workflows. So, NDI is going to be dependent on your switching software. NDI, as far as I understand it, is basically a multicast backbone. So I think you need a minimum of a 1 gigabit network backbone for NDI to work. But it is a really nice setup. In fact, I might be working on my first NDI based project where because people are going to now are looking at NDI to bridge remote locations and maybe using SRT to do conversion between NDI and so forth. But NDI is a very is a really nice way to work as just a connected solution for all your gear. So you can start using Ethernet cables instead of SDI cables to do long runs at venues. You can use NDI to subscribe to sources within your tooling. Wirecast supports NDI. I believe vMix supports NDI. NewTek, who is responsible for TriCaster, I believe started the NDI spec. So of course, NewTek solutions are very geared to NDI. That's about all I could say about NDI. What are some of the best ways to measure latency at different parts of your workflow? What are some of the best ways to troubleshoot or fix it? That's a really good question. And I don't know if I'll have an exact answer or all the possibilities, but one thing I like to do in Wirecast is you can actually download samples of timers that are down to the microsecond. I'll put on a loop in Wirecast. I don't want to launch Wirecast right now just because I'm a little nervous that it might introduce some extra CPU to this broadcast. But if I was in Wirecast, you could, typically what I do is push, add to the live broadcast a common frame of reference for time, and then you compare that to what you see anywhere else in the chain. So you have two windows open. Again, I'm going to go back to Chris Allen and what he was showing between, the mic, under 1 second latency that he was demonstrating with Red 5 Pro. You would augment that by putting timers into your actual broadcast display. And I'll often use Wirecast to facilitate that pushing of a stream. And then this might sound kludgy, but what I'll do is I'll have Wirecast open and I'll have a player open and I'll just do screenshots one after another showing the differential in times, and go to sorry, I got sidetracked by seeing some chat. Going to the oh man, I lost my train of thought there. I'll take the screenshots and then do the time offsets to the just mathematically from those screenshots. So that's one way of working with latency. I'm going to move on to the next question. So what are the best ways to troubleshoot or fix it? Fixing the latency. One of the things that you could do, depending on your encoder, you could do this in FFmpeg, is reduce your buffer size. So not all encoders are going to do that, but you can reduce the number of frames that are in the buffer. A lot of times you're just going to be able to control that with your keyframe interval. So use shorter keyframe intervals, because that will often dictate how packets push out of your encoder. And make sure you're using really small, if you're using HLS or dash, segment sizes should be super low. Like even if you're using traditional HLS, it's going to be 2 seconds, or a 2-second chunk size is usually as low as I will go. But that's one way to reduce latency. Of course, if you're doing WebRTC and other ways to do live streaming, use UDP over TCP for your handshakes and transmission. Not for the handshakes, for the transmission part of it. UDP is going to be much more lower latency than TCP. But those are the ones that come to mind right away in terms of what you can do. Media servers can also reduce buffer sizes as well on a low level, so you can look at that. I have a question from question from Christian there. Have you worked with Teams live events? What are some of the differences, similarity? Unfortunately, the only experience I've had with Teams is with my daughter, because they're using Teams with her school on top of Zoom. So sometimes they use Teams. So I don't have a lot of experience with Teams, unfortunately. So I can't comment on the similarities or differences. Most of the pro webcasters that I know that I've been working with and helping build out their workflow are all Zoom based. I haven't had anyone approach me yet using Teams. HEVC for low latency streaming too. Yeah, you could certainly use HEVC for ultra low latency. With respect, I mean, again, it's more a matter of what that encoder is going to expose for pushing it out. The problem with low keyframe intervals is that you're using up more bit rate for those more frequent keyframe snapshots. So you may have to increase your overall bit rate, which in and of itself can reduce latency, increase latency, right? Because if you have higher bit rates, it's going to take longer for those bits to go across the pipe. So lower bit rates are always going to need less time to transport their bits for a complete frame than higher bit rates. So just be mindful of that there's trade-offs with higher quality versus lower quality for those. What are some of the ways you like to monitor usage or other metrics live? What metrics do you feel you need to prioritize? Is there an app for that? What's the best way to present this data to end clients to make them feel they have gotten the best value or overcome issues? That's a really good question. So there are, metrics by and large are still, and it's part of that survey I put in there. I just ask in surveys now, what are you expecting to receive? So usually I throw that back on the client and what kind of analytics. Do they want to just know how many people were there? Do they want to see breakdowns by locations? Any of that's going to increase requirements. The problem with using Edge, like if I'm using CloudFront to distribute a live stream, then I'm not going to be able to gather easy metrics from CloudFront. But if I'm using a player that's got callbacks, whether it's videoJS or JW player, I can monitor. It requires more dev time and dev work. You may need to come up with a system that gets the metrics that you want. You can't necessarily pass all those costs on to the first client that use it, but it's reusable. You can. I would just encourage you to start gathering custom metrics if you can. Every platform offers metrics, JW Player, Mux, Brightcove, whoever you're using for live streaming, Limelight, Akamai, there's likely ways that they're going to offer analytics gathering for you. But again, the granularity I find is often going to be gathered from the player. So it's always good to have backup data from a CDN or whoever it is that's distributing your streams. I know Wowza Cloud will give you unique views as well. They're using Fastly as their CDN architecture, but what I would encourage you is to gather metrics at the player. And to date, the best, if you need something off the shelf, it's not cheap, but Mux.com, their data offering, not their video offering, Mux now has gotten into the live streaming business where, you can push to Mux and consume it. If you just look at their data analytics, it's pretty amazing. I was able to get a trial account. I used it for some government streaming, and it gives you some of the best real-time stats I've ever seen on any platform. You can now use Google Analytics for real-time analytics, but again, it's going to require you to do a little bit more work or a lot more work on the Google Analytics side of things, and some people aren't comfortable with Google having their data, so that might not be an option. I can't use that with Google Analytics with my government clients because they don't want that data in third-party hands where they don't know what's happening to it. So I'm going to go to, but those are all really good questions. Feel free, by the way, to follow up to my email if I don't cover it to the extent. Have you considered using a new tech TC1 to consolidate some of the gear workflow? It may eliminate Wirecast or use it as a backup. I have considered it. It's mainly just that, once you make an initial capital investment in gear, I'm going to use that moving forward. And again, like if I look at new, I appreciate that recommendation. There's likely ways, again, the thing I don't like about some new tech gear like TriCasters is they're basically running Windows on a dedicated appliance. I'm not a big fan of that. I like hardware. And again, that's just my personal preference. So, hardware can fail too, but I like dedicated appliances where I've got signal to signal going out. And maybe the TC1 isn't using any kind of operating system under the hood to do that, as a GUI. But yeah, there's definitely ways you can consolidate gear. And I would say, as a rule, I try to eliminate as many connections as possible. Like I showed you my other example, Wirecast is a bit overkill just to generate lower thirds, but I already have Wirecast, and if it's just sitting there and it's only doing one little thing in a bigger workflow, then by all means, I've seen people use Keynote with a dedicated, Macker to push lower thirds at full screen out over HDMI into some other workflow. So you can, whatever works for those budgets and gear that you already have. But again, really good question just in terms of consolidating, because again, like you mentioned, for redundancy, if you can minimize the gear, especially if you're not the running it, you have to train an operator who may not have as much technical background as you. And if there's trouble, they need to be able to switch over without knowing as much as you do. By all means, all-in-ones can do a lot better job of bringing up, resources that aren't as skilled at running live webcasts to get there quickly. But again, I'm a big fan of always having as many SMEs on the project. It's going to make it more expensive, but I'm not going after, the lowest budget webcast as possible. So just something to keep in mind. But thank you for that question, Christian. It looks like we're running out of time here. So I'm going to go ahead and just answer the next two questions here. We've got William asking, how would you advise people who are using cloud platform outputs like vMix and Kiswa, I'm not even familiar with, streaming to a professional broadcast IRD like Adam or Ericsson ones who doesn't very much like VBRTS and internet profiles? Well, let's just look at that VBR. I would certainly tweak my encoder so that it's not VBR. Anything that anything that I do with an encoder, I'm going to minimize VBR as much as I can. I want as much of a CBR out just so that it does play nice with a wide variety of ingest. But even from a transcoder point of view, if I'm using a server-based transcoder or what, all those services are doing transcoding to different bit rates and resolutions, having a steady bit rate coming in is always going to play nicer with the transcoding profiles that are in place there. And I oftentimes have to use higher bit rates, right? If I have custom gear that does a really good job of H.264 or HEVC encoding, the cloud platform might not have, right? If like, Wowza just uses main concept for their CPU-based architecture, the NVIDIA GPU acceleration that I'm going to get through Wowza has its own gotchas too, and I can go in and control I can control properties in those profiles to try to make it more CBR. But just looking at HLS as a standard or as a manifest format, you want your chunk sizes to be consistent, right? The algorithms aren't going to work very well for bitrate switching if your chunk sizes are all over the place. So one of the things that good ingest will show, I'm only familiar with the ones I've used. Wowza Cloud will show it. I believe Teradex will show it too, but you can see the keyframe interval coming across in a diagram like live for your ingest. You can see the bit rate, how steady that bit rate is coming in. So, as much as possible, I try to make sure that CBR has as little, or if it is VBR, it has as little variance as possible so that there's a steady flow of bits so that those chunk sizes stay relatively the same. I'm a big fan of using MediaStream Validator. That's a free Apple tool. If you are subscribed to the developer Apple program, you can download their HLS tools. They only run on Mac, but they're really great tools. MediaStream Validator will sample your live stream for whatever duration you want and show you just how every bitrate in that profile is matching or conforming to the bit rates that you have. Last question, Larix Broadcaster is good and have used with SRT to vMix. That's just more a comment from Scott. I have a client that I've just started playing with Larix Broadcaster. Thank you for reminding me of the name. I've been really impressed with it. Wowza's sunsetting their GoCoder application. Larix is free. If you haven't looked at Larix, I would recommend. Like I have clients that are deploying Larix they have a web page. They tell people to download Larix, and then you can configure that from a web. If you have clients that you want to configure to live stream from mobile devices, it's a really nice broadcaster. And so I'm going to go ahead and end with that. Eric, I'm going to give it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was outstanding. And there are still, 10 questions left, something like that. I will forward those questions to Rob, and if he has time, he will reach out to you via email with responses. Is it okay that I just did some work for you there, Rob? Excellent.
Please.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. And thanks to all of you in the audience for your questions. Thanks again to our session sponsors, Red 5 Pro and Digital Element. Their links are in the chat. Please check them out. And thanks again to Limelight Networks for being the diamond sponsor for all of Streaming Media East Connect.